Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California, this is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael. And today, in honor of St. Patrick's Day, which is tomorrow, we will be talking with Caireann Frasca, one of our regular guests now, who has walked the path of the Celtic and Avalonian mysteries for more than 2 decades. In particular, we will be focusing on St. Patrick, his relationship to Emain Macha, and Saint Brigid as well. If there's time, we may share some of our personal connections and stories to Ireland. But before we get started, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to our show. We're super excited to have you guys here. We've got some really great shows coming up. We have Lama Kathy Wesley back by popular demand next week. We're going to be talking about the dual mind and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing and what kind of practices we can do to benefit that. And then at the end of the month, our good friend Jacqueline Delibes will be back. We'll be talking about the importance of humor and spirituality. So that's going to be awesome. And I've always believed if you have lost your sense of humor, you cannot attain one with the divine being. So I think that the sense of humor is a very big part of spirituality. And then we've got great shows coming up in April. We've got shows on numerology, the Knights Templar. We've got a little bit of paranormal stuff. So all kinds of cool things. So get all the information on our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SIXTH, all spelled out. And while you're there, you can buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi if you can afford to and want to support our show. But the most important thing is please click subscribe and like to our episodes. That really does help us more than anything. So we're grateful to have all you guys with us. And I don't want to take up too much time today because I know St. Patrick is one of my favorite subjects. Anything Celtic. My mother's side were the Celts, and I even wore my green kilt today in honor of the show. So I'm going to kick it back to Krista. So take it away, Krista.
Thanks a lot, Michael. And welcome back, Caireann.
Thank you so much. It's great to be back.
So we've had you on before. You talked about the divine archetypes, masculine, feminine archetypes of the Avalonian pantheon, and then also autumn equinox magic for those of you that don't know her. So we're always happy to have you back.
Thank you. I always enjoy spending time with you.
So let's get started on this fascinating man and some of the things connected to him, St. Patrick. What would you like to begin with?
I think I would like to start with Emain Macha, which is the place in Northern Ireland. It's in County Armagh, and that is where St. Patrick built his church. It was actually an ancient sacred site of the Irish Celts. So when St. Patrick was a slave, he was a slave for 6 years. He was actually Welsh. And during his time in around 400 AD, he was captured. There was a huge slave trade in Ireland at the time, and he was captured and enslaved for 6 years. And he actually was a shepherd, shepherd slave on Slamish Mountain, which is very near Emain Macha. So he would have been very much aware of the sacredness of the land and the site there. It was the ancient seat of the High Kings of Ulster and the Knights of the Red Branch. So that's one of the more prominent locations in the Ulster cycle of Irish mythology. There's 4 great cycles in Irish mythology, and that is one of them. The Ulster cycle, and the most famous story is the cattle raid of Cooley. That might be familiar to some listeners. But they actually, in the area last year, they discovered quite a bit of archaeological evidence that showed like a vast temple complex that dates back to the Iron Age there, as well as looks like residences from the medieval era. So they're beginning deeper research and excavations into those. But it was a very, very important site to the ancient Irish Celts. And, you know, it's interesting because in the Republic of Ireland, Uisne and Newgrange and the Boyne River Valley get most of the press in terms of these famous Neolithic sites, ancient, Iron Age sites. But unfortunately, they don't get as much attention. Emain Macha doesn't get anywhere near the attention as those sites do. So, you know, I would like to shine a light on it there. It is of great importance. I actually have a friend who lives very near Emain Macha, and he happens to be a wonderful photographer, and he goes up there quite a bit and takes pictures. But he's started a Facebook group with some others because recently there were some trees that were cut down, and the trees in that, they're very sacred in that area, obviously, and trees were always sacred to the Celts, and continue to be. And, you know, it's not entirely clear what happened. It looks like there was some sickness in the trees and they had to take, but there was no ceremony, there was no announcement, no nothing. They just took them down. So it was that sort of galvanized my friend and a group of people there to start a Facebook community to build awareness of Emain Macha and its importance, as well as potentially finding some ways, you know, how can those trees be replanted, and, you know, how can people contribute to the sustainability of the site. So if people are interested, it's called the Emain Macha community on Facebook. And my friend, the photographer, he has his own page. If you enjoy Irish mythology, symbolism, imagery, his photos are just really beautiful. And his page is Daniel Fagan Photography on Facebook, which I can give you the links to those.
So what does
anyway,
that name mean? Do you have the background of the name?
Yeah, so it actually means the height of Macha. So it's sort of on a hill above the area, you know, that sort of overlooks the area. And Macha is ancient sovereignty goddess of the Irish Celts. She is actually one aspect of the triple goddess known as the Morrigan. And so she was sort of the more fierce aspect, I would say. Her symbol is the raven. So that was an area where she was certainly worshipped. And there's a story about her as part of the Ulster cycle that I can tell you if you're interested.
Yes, I am very interested.
Okay. So, you know, the ancient Irish sovereignty goddesses were goddesses of the land. And so, you know, the kings, when they ascended to their thrones, and of course, back then it was more like a chieftain of a tribe situation. But in order for their rule to be sort of validated, they had to symbolically marry the goddess of the land and vow to protect the land and its people. And so this story is about how one of the kings actually did not do that. So Macha became the wife of an Ulster farmer, and who was a widower. And sometime after his wife died, Macha appeared at his farm, and after circling his house 3 times, she entered, began taking care of the place and acting as his wife without saying a word. Soon she became pregnant, and as long as they were together, they continued to be prosperous. The wealth grew, and they were doing quite well for themselves. But he was called to attend a big festival that was organized by the King of Ulster at the time. And before he left, Macha warned him not to speak of her at all, say nothing about her to anyone, and he promised to do so. However, there was a big chariot race, and, you know, everyone was bragging about whose horses were better and who was going to win. And he said, that his wife could outrun any one of the horses, even the king's. And so the king, of course, being the king, said, "Prove it. My horses are better than everyone else's, and I'm sure that your wife could never outrun them." And he actually held the farmer on pain of death until he could make good on his claim. So Macha, of course, as I mentioned, was heavily pregnant at the time, but she was brought by force to the gathering, and the king forced her to race the horses. Of course, it was so traumatic that she went into labor at the finish line and had a very painful birth, giving birth to twins. And of course, being a goddess of the land, being a fierce goddess and an aspect of the Morrigan, she was enraged. And because she was so disrespected and humiliated, she cursed the men of Ulster to be overcome with weakness, or sort of as weak as a woman in labor at the time of their greatest need. So, and this weakness would last for 5 days, and the curse would last for 9 generations. And thereafter, the place where she gave birth was called Emain Macha. So, the story really shows how, you don't mess with the goddess of the land. Because, if she is mistreated, and we can see this sort of in our own environmental, crisis of the present day, if the land is mistreated, she is going to take her revenge and her vengeance. So, it was a very sort of powerful story about not disrespecting the land, but also about how the rule of a bad king can really lead to disaster, which, there's a lot of parallels in modern life for that story. So it's a really powerful story. And, I think her nature as that, sovereign goddess, in terms of, there's nothing that you can do to disrespect me that you're not going to pay a price for. Take care of me and we're all good, but don't disrespect me.
I was reading just a little bit in this book by Miranda Green called Celtic Goddesses. It's something I bought years ago. And I wish I brought the exact quote now, because she said that women were not necessarily rulers, but sovereignty was seen as female.
Yes.
And that was really a powerful statement. I mean, I thought, oh yeah. So it was, you were already, just by being female, you were sovereign. And so I really liked that. Like I said, it was a really nice quote. But kind of getting back to St. Patrick, so was during that time, would that site have been seen as sacred, and would he have known all about it and want to be connected to it for some reason?
He would have, for sure. I think because that is a place where the people went to worship, especially given this recent evidence that's come out of, this major temple structure. People clearly were there, celebrating all manner of things. It was a sacred site to the people there. So I have the sense that he would have been, in his time as the slave shepherd on Slamish Mountain, he would have seen, how the people were interacting with that site, how people lived. And he probably would have thought, that's probably a great place for me to go and start spreading the word of, the new religion, the new Christianity, because the faithful, even though they're faithful to the old ways, are already coming to this place. So he actually returned to Ireland. Once he was sort of released as a slave, he returned to Ireland around 433 AD. And he negotiated with the king of Ulster at the time, who was called Dara, and asked if he could build his church at Emain Macha. But he was actually denied. The king wouldn't allow it. So he ended up building it in nearby Ardmacha, which is now called Armagh, and it's also known as the ecclesiastical capital of Ireland now. So, and there's not only one, but 2 St. Patrick's cathedrals in Armagh. One is Catholic and one is Anglican or Protestant. And the St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City is actually built. It looks very similar to the Catholic St. Patrick's in Armagh, with the sort of Gothic revival style and the spires. So you have to wonder if that was influenced by the original back in the old country.
Well, I do remember from Jim's show, he was saying how Patrick kind of mixed it up with the Druids and Kings. Like his way was to try to work with them and not to, push his agenda on. Like he was more of a smooth talker.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true, but that's what the impression that he had gotten, that he thought that worked, bribery worked, and, certainly could see that.
I think that I get that sense of him. I feel like he was, and I have no evidence of this, but my own sort of intuition and what I've read about him, but I feel like he was, he would have been quite a diplomat, and really able to sort of bridge the differences between the old pagan ways and the new Christian ways, and sort of help people see the connections between them. Because really, when you look at Ireland and the sort of the specific sort of flavor of Christianity in Ireland, if you want to put it that way, it really is more sort of tied back into the old ways than you would think at first glance. And, the elements are important. And when you read some of the old, some people say, well, it was the Christian monks who wrote down the old pagan ways, so we know they were true. So it's kind of like he would have been somebody who saw the parallels and was able to bring in, or make the new ways more easily sort of digested by the people, because he'd be able to, after spending so much time in Ireland and watching and learning, he would be able to sort of make it easier for people to understand the new ways by drawing these parallels back to how they were already worshiping and what their spirituality already was. And that continues to this day. Celtic Christianity is really beautiful, and I feel like it's one of the only examples that I see of these two sort of ways blending in a really symbiotic kind of a way.
So in how, in other ways, does it blend? That's interesting observation. So I'm not really familiar with Celtic Christianity versus Christianity, and just maybe, St. Patrick or Brigid maybe would come to mind too. But how do you feel today's modern take would be that it still blends both?
Well, I feel like, there's a story about St. Patrick, and I think that Jim mentioned this in his episode last year too, which is about, there's this story that really dates only back to sort of the 17th century, about how St. Patrick taught the people the Trinity by using a shamrock, a three-leaf clover for the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But actually, the number 3 was so significant to the Celts already. That story that I told about Macha and circling the farmer's house 3 times. There were triple goddesses. The Morrigan had 3 aspects. 3 was a very important number to them. And so this wouldn't have been a concept that they would have had a hard time understanding. When you think of, so when you look at that, it's almost like St. Patrick knew that. And if the story has any truth to it, he was already building on what the people already knew and understood. So that's kind of a way, when you see a triple goddess and, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, it's kind of, there's parallels there. An embodiment of this is really Brigid. So Brigid was a goddess of the Celts, but also Saint Brigid. And while these aren't necessarily the same person or being, they both have a lot. They were both very well known for working miracles, whether in her goddess form or in her saint form. So, she was so beloved by the people, that there was no way they were going to let her go. And so they found a way to sort of bring her, which I know that's happened in other like the Roman Catholicism too,
Mm-hmm.
where some of the old gods end up getting incorporated into sainthood. But she's a really good example of that. And when you look at her, there's actually evidence that they knew each other, Saint Brigid and Saint Patrick. It's said that he actually baptized her mother, and she became known as sort of the feminine counterpart to Saint Patrick. They were apparently great friends. She was said also to be a midwife to Mother Mary, and a foster mother to Jesus Christ himself. And she became known as Mary of the Gales. So, she's sort of, in this one aspect, she's a Christian saint. But then when you look back at her, her being as a goddess, her aspect as a goddess, there are a lot of parallels there as well.
So was there potentially then a historic figure that was Saint Bridget, or
Yes.
and living at the time, around the time of Patrick, Saint Patrick?
Yes. Yeah. So they did know each other, and they were apparently good friends. So Saint Bridget, she founded a monastery down in Kildare. So now we're moving down into the southern part of the Republic of what's now the Republic of Ireland. And Kildare is actually the original Irish name is Kildara, which means Church of the Oak. And that is a place where there was an oak that was sacred to the Druids, and that's where she chose to build her monastery. There in that area also was a pagan shrine to Goddess Brigid. So it's blurry in terms of myth and legend and fact, but she was an actual person. She became the first abbess of the first convent in Ireland, which was there at Kildare. And that became a center for art, for smith work and learning, which are also, these are things that Goddess Brigid represents. Smith work, divine inspiration. In Irish, it's called imbus, and it's this sort of creative impulse, that creative fire that sort of comes down from above. And we know that, and the Celtic people continue to be, extraordinarily creative with the smith work and metal work, with poetry, storytelling, all of these things that, people would have learned at the convent through their programs, but these are also things that they would look to Goddess Brigid for inspiration and guidance on as well.
It's so fascinating to me that when I was doing this research, I think I didn't know about the Kildare, Church of Kildare, and I was telling you earlier that as a young girl, I lived in Leeslip, County Kildare, and unfortunately, I don't remember going to visit that church, and I wish, now I would like to go and visit, and then the whole idea that what it meant, the word, the oak in it, because that's my tree that I was connected to because of my birth. And you just start to wonder about these little seeds that happen in your childhood and how, and I write poetry and I loved Yeats when I was growing up, but we weren't, really raised with, even though I have Irish, we weren't really raised as, Irish Americans or anything. And I think the one other thing I wanted to share was this concept of the land. When we lived there for 2 years, there is something incredibly powerful about certain lands that I've lived in, and Ireland definitely has that magical, evocative, even if you know nothing about its history. There are other places in the world like that too, that I visited in different ways, but I think that magic and that sense of, you just kind of get it by being there. And I think it starts to get you interested in it later on in life if you're not already. Because it really played a huge role in my whole family. Just living there for 2 years made a big impression on us, I think.
Yeah, it happens, and it's interesting. Even if you don't realize what's going on at the time, there's a connection that you feel, um, and you're right. It's through the very land. When I went to Ireland a few years ago, I felt it everywhere I went. It was a very different energy, and an energy that I felt immediately connected with. And I don't know, I have some Irish blood, I've got some Welsh and British, and, when I have family in England, and when I go there too, I was saying to a friend last time I went, I said, every time I leave, I feel like I left part of my soul there, because it continues to call me back. And I do feel the same way about Ireland, and whether that's like genetic memory, you have this DNA and this heritage and this blood in your veins. And, you sort of step on this land. The same thing happened to me actually in Italy, and I wasn't expecting that. I was excited to go, but sort of more as a tourist. And when I got there, and, there were just certain places in Italy that absolutely, I still feel called to those places too. So I hope that I don't know how they would research that, but it would be interesting to see this idea of genetic memory, and this idea of, just the sense of these places being a part of you too, whether you've ever stepped foot there or not. When you're lucky enough to go and to have that experience, there's nothing like it.
Yeah, I think there is something to genetic memory, and also I think the soul wants what it wants, because I've had friends that have no connection to a particular culture, and they're madly in love with it. Like they just have nothing in their bloodline, but you can see they just have completely immersed themselves, and I think that might be sort of more of a soul or reincarnation type memory too. And I think they're all legitimate ways of looking at it, because it's a very visceral and real experience for many people. You don't even have to be, metaphysical to have these experiences at all,
It's very true. I'm actually really drawn to the Norse, sort of the Scandinavia and the Nordic countries, and I have yet to visit, but I've always really been fascinated. I remember the first book of mythology I ever read was a book of Norse mythology, and I mean, I was only 8 or 9 years old, and I mean, it was just the best, and I immediately understood what these beings were. It was just so to your past life point, I actually did the ancestry DNA, and I fully expected Viking blood, and I have none. So it must be a past life thing. But yeah, very, very much drawn to that.
Now, do you, getting back to St. Patrick, do you find you celebrate it or acknowledge it in any way every year? What do you do, if anything?
I do. Yeah, I lived in the Boston area for a long time, and so out there, it's everywhere. It's a very big deal, and it's crazy. Obviously, the last couple of years, or this year and last year, nothing's going on, but yeah, I always like to acknowledge it. I mean, sometimes it's just baking a really nice Irish soda bread and enjoying that, and acknowledging, as you enjoy it, sort of paying your respects to the heritage. It's not necessarily for me about St. Patrick per se. It's about that part of my heritage and my spirituality, and honoring that. And it sort of varies every year depending on what's happening. But, I will often take time out to just immerse myself, listen to Irish music and really sort of get into the experience. I find that since especially this year and last year, since I couldn't go, just being able to sort of recreate the experience for myself was very fulfilling and good for the soul.
Yeah, I think tomorrow, I'm going to do something for the first time in a long time. And I just started reading like some of the, the reasons for different things, like the wearing of the green, according to at least what I found, was related to the Irish Rebellion of 1798. And yeah, it's an homage to that. So it's real Irish nationalism. That's, of course, their flag has green in it too. And it is interesting when you start looking into the reasons for things or the holidays and celebrations. If you have a connection, it made me want to look even deeper into my interest in Ireland. And I mean, I don't have a huge family. I think I'm like 12% Irish, but it did play a role because my mother would sometimes talk about her grandmother, and all she'd ever say was, she'd tell these really scary ghost stories, and that would scare all the kids. That's all I remember anyway, you know. And I was like, yeah, that sounds like an Irish grandmother.
I love it.
Now I wish I knew what they were, you know. And here I am interested in the paranormal now.
Yeah.
That great grandmother's coming through strong.
That's right. She said it worked.
You know. So and then, you know, there's of course Michael, who's, you know, got the Scottish background, and he's from Nova Scotia, and having lived in Nova Scotia, there's all that great Celtic music, and it's also an incredibly beautiful, evocative land where they still speak the Scottish and Gaelic in little towns and fluently, and so you really can feel that same energy, even though it's sort of a different aspect. It's still the same, you know, kind of mother blood, I guess. So if once it kind of gets into your blood, I think you want to go back to it, even if you can only go back once or twice in your life. So.
It's very true. It's very true. And so, you know, we have to take those opportunities to, you know, have a little bit of it every day, or as often as we need, to sort of fill that part of our soul that's longing for that experience. Somebody that I love to read, actually, when just going back to what we were talking about the parallels between sort of the old ways and the Christian ways and Celtic Christianity, John O'Donohue was a beautiful poet and writer. And I love reading his work because I feel he expresses that connection. So like the real reverence for nature and the land and the cycles of the seasons, and just this deep soulfulness. And he was a former priest. And so that both of these things inform his writing, and it just sends me every time. Anything that he's written, I've devoured, and I love his work. So if people are interested in sort of immersing themselves in that feeling, and that sort of, it's a full sensory experience when you read his stuff, and that would be a great book or two to pick up tomorrow.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, he's amazing.
So going back a little to Brigid, so what are the two Brigids known for that are similar? Do you have some examples as far as what specifically they both represent?
Yeah, so it's interesting because Saint Brigid was known for her miracles and her charitable works, and just the generosity and abundance that she was always contributing to the community and to, the greater world at large. And so the goddess Brigid is said to be the daughter of the Morrigan, who we mentioned before, and also the Dagda, who was sort of the great god, the good god of Ireland. All of them are part of the ancient race of gods, the Tuatha De Danann, who, were really like the founding race of Ireland, I suppose you could say, or the founding gods. And the Dagda is known for his abundance, and sort of being that provider, which I think Brigid as goddess really embodies. And also the fierceness of her mother, the Morrigan, it's tempered by the Dagda. But she, this sort of knowing who she is and what she's about, Saint Brigid as the human woman, and also the goddess Brigid, and the fierceness sort of comes from, being very grounded in her purpose, which was to serve and to help. She was a goddess of healing. She's a fire goddess, but also a water goddess. So there's wells all over Ireland that are dedicated to Brigid, goddess Brigid and Saint Brigid. And so the people will go there for the healing waters or to say a prayer for healing. So those are some other parallels between the two sort of aspects of her.
Now, my understanding too is they're both also associated a bit with prophecy, which I didn't know until recently. I always associate the Morgan in the Irish pantheon as the one associated with prophecy. Yeah. So that kind of surprised me.
Yeah, and I feel with Brigid, she absolutely is someone, you know, when I'm doing any kind of work where I really need to tap into my intuition, you know, and sort of, for me with Brigid, it's more about envisioning what can be in that way. So sort of getting a vision of, if I've got particularly a creative project, because I often call on her for help when I'm embarking on a new creative project of some kind. And I do feel that she has that ability to kind of show you how this can play out, what the end result can be. It's up to you to do it. And that's where that idea of imbus also comes in, which is the Irish word for divine inspiration. She's a real channel for that, and she can help you open yourself up to that inspiration as well. There's a lot of images of Brigid with sort of fire coming out of her head. And that to me is that divine creative fire.
I think too that, of course, that means she's, as you said earlier, is associated with the poetry too. But what's interesting, I notice, is the more you kind of look at all the different goddesses within the same pantheon, a lot of times they have crossovers, you know, because the Morgan also has some poetry associated with it. Though my initial impression, this is my only, and this could be completely wrong when I think about it, but for some reason when I first met the concept of the Morgan versus Brigid, I saw Brigid as kind of this gentle energy. And then the more you kind of look into it, you're like, well, that's not exactly true. No, I mean, and I think that has to do with the way a lot of the goddesses were sort of split off from themselves. For instance, if you study in Aphrodite has a warrior aspect that was sort of split away from her. And they took it because that was part of the, if you want to call it, I don't like that word patriarchy so much, but that idea that for whatever reason, certain aspects of the goddess were suppressed, though I've never seen any conclusive evidence that the goddess was fully suppressed. She's always been there. You know, maybe certain aspects of her were suppressed or sort of divided in a sense. And so the more you start to see, well, in a lot of ways, they have similarities too. And they are quite different to work with, I think, but they often will have some common ground.
For sure. And it's interesting too, to look at how many goddesses of love through, you know, across cultures are also goddesses of war. I'm thinking of Freya, you know, in the Norse pantheon, who, you know, is definitely a goddess of love, but also very fierce, and, you know, the head of she's a warrior goddess and the leader of the Valkyries, and, you know, she's in it. So it is a very interesting thing. And I think you're right. You know, these aspects of the divine feminine got a bit narrower and narrower, you know, over time, until, you know, Aphrodite is just known as, you know, love and beauty. And her warrior aspect is just not as familiar to people. So it's interesting to see that coming. That's one of the things that really appeals to me about the Celtic goddesses, specifically, is that they don't tend to get, there's a fierceness to all of them. You know, there aren't a lot of sort of, you know, they can have their gentle aspects, and they can have and they're kind, but it's almost in this tough love sort of way, even when that kindness is showing itself. There's a fierceness, and it's not an aggression at all, but it's in some cases, I should say, but it's really this strength and this groundedness and this, you know, back to what we were talking about with the goddess of the land, you do not mess with her. It's that sort of um, knowledge and full embodiment of their power, which is something that I think a lot of women, particularly, or people that identify as females, struggle with in the modern day, because of the last 2,000 years of sort of these aspects of the divine feminine being sort of pushed to one side. What did we have to sort of, as a role model, what did we have to look to? Which again that's why I really am attracted to the Celtic goddesses, because they really show you how to do that and show you how to step into your own power. And that I think is something that we really need. And it's an authentic, grounded power. It's not necessarily power over, it's power with, which is a key point. I think that, a lot of people, like you were referring to the patriarchy, a lot of people, say, well, that was, the men were in power, now the women need to be in power. And it's like, we need to meet in the middle. We need to work together. The world needs both, as above, so below. The world needs both, but we also need to balance those masculine and feminine aspects within ourselves, and really integrate those things. I feel like that's where a lot of the true power lies. And that's what I think these Celtic goddesses embody quite a lot. A lot of them have very sort of masculine characteristics and very feminine characteristics at the same time. And they just own it. They own all of it. And that for me is very empowering.
Well, it's interesting too that last year Jim brought up the fact that St. Patrick was really popular with women. And one reason was that by converting, it gave them some freedom and he could protect them from rape. And it was, in a way, you could sort of see that as rather feminist. And you think about the time where women didn't necessarily have a lot of choices, that, maybe being a nun was a good choice rather than having to raise babies forever or die in childbirth or live with some, horrible abusive husband. And I said, well, that's interesting. You could see St. Patrick maybe has a little bit of a protector of women. And I mean, it sort of resonated with me. I liked it. I was like, that makes sense according to the time.
Yeah. And I think that is definitely a sense that I have of him as well. And for sure, for women to have another option, must have been extraordinary for them at the time. And there's a funny story about him, and even his friendship with Brigid, the woman who would become Saint Brigid. That says a lot too, because when do we ever hear of at that time of a church leader being on equal ground with a woman, no matter how powerful she might have been. But there's a really great story when she was going to found the convent and become abbess, when she was taking her final vows. There's a story that St. Patrick is the one that was with her, and he accidentally read the vows for the priest, for a priest. And when someone called him out on it, he said, "Oh, it doesn't matter. She's destined for great things." And I love that, because not only does it show his sort of playfulness, and he didn't take himself too terribly seriously, he understood also who he was dealing with, who he was working with. And he saw her goodness and how she could contribute to his overall cause, which was really spreading this new religion. And she was right there with him, and he honored her way of bringing it to the people as well. So I think I love that, because it feels like he saw her as a contemporary and an equal, rather than, this subservient role, which most women played at the time.
Yeah, it was just really, he's really a fascinating character in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
I think I was thinking this year I was going to read. There's only 2 known works of his, and they're not very long. And I got it from my Kindle, so tomorrow I was going to read. I think it's his memoirs are called like the St. Patrick's memoirs, the Confessions, and then there's the letter to the Karatekas or something, the soldiers.
right.
I have it down. But anyway, it was all because of listening to the show last year.
Yeah.
I was like inspired. So maybe I'll do that and really, and I guess that you were saying that he didn't take himself seriously. That kind of comes across in his memoirs, his humility, and that's why they think it's lasted as long, because his writing is very simple and straightforward, and that seems to often last forever because people can relate to it or feel it's authentic. Which says a lot, since he wasn't popular for a couple hundred years, I guess.
Right. And I think that's a great, there's just you don't get the sense that there's a lot of ego there. He really believed in what he was teaching and what he was doing. And he was coming from a place that was in service to the divine. It wasn't about filling his own coffers or gaining power or making a name for himself or whatever. It was about the work. And I think that's something that, was sorely, needed at the time. And that's part of his, and of course today. And that's part of why he endures, is because he's relatable. People can sort of understand where he was coming from. And, he sets an example, but it's also, he feels like a real human being and not this sort of, certainly there's the mythologized version of him, but he still feels like a real person.
Mm-hmm.
And reading his own words, certainly, I haven't read all of it, but I've read bits and pieces, and it just feels like very conversational, very down to earth, just a regular guy.
Well, it's really fascinating too. It seems like that perhaps the worlds are going to start to integrate in a new way. Certainly the authentic Irish movement to educate people on the real mythologies and the real histories is becoming larger, though I don't think it's as well known. And yet, that someone like Saint Patrick is still going to endure. And I'm wondering if there's going to be sort of a new sort of union of these different spiritual groups, and something else will emerge from it. I don't know what would emerge from it, because how it is when you blend things like in alchemy, and then something new comes out of it. So it'll be interesting to see, because I don't think it's going to. I know some people want things to swing back. That's just not going to happen. We can't go back. You don't want to go completely backwards. To what.
True.
But there's, I try to follow and look for some of the deeper, the real myths of the Irish, and really it's difficult because of the language and having to learn to pronounce the names. I'm still really bad at, but I'm trying to learn just so I can read them. I'm like, okay, how do I pronounce that? But there's even like little videos on that, how you pronounce these deities' names. Like, yay! I'm so excited.
Thank God for YouTube, right?
Oh, well, it makes it's nice because, the Irish name a lot of things in their mythology. They use the names a lot. It's not like they just mention the name once, but they've got all those names, and it's a little intimidating to read the original stories. But if you kind of have at least a sense of how to pronounce it, at least for me, it's easier.
I couldn't agree more. It's I remember when I first started getting into all of this and just thinking, like, why is nothing pronounced the way that it's spelled? It just felt so, just like an enormous hurdle to get over. And I still look up, I'm certainly do not speak Irish, and one day that's a goal. I would love to be able to speak it. But part of the challenge too is all the different sort of dialects. So you've got, they speak one kind of Irish in the north, another one, in the west, another one in the south. So I actually, in looking up the pronunciation, I remember, a long time ago, looking up the pronunciation of Emain Macha, and I clicked on 3 different links, and each one pronounced it 3 different ways. And I said, okay, I'm just going to do the best that I can here. But yeah, it is challenging, and it's a beautiful, the way that they use language, the way that the terms, like the translations into English are so beautiful. Like, I know Mactira is the word for wolf, but it means son of the land.
Oh,
And
wow.
there's loads of particularly animals
Hmm.
that have these beautiful poetic names. In English, what is it? I can't remember the Irish name, but it's a ladybug, and the Irish name for it means God's little cow. You know,
Oh.
and it's, I know, and it's just it's so beautiful, which is a motivation to want to learn, more of the language, because um, you see that the language and the poetry runs so deep. This is part of who, it's not just part of the culture, but it's just part of who we are as, people of Irish descent, and, the people who live there. So I, for one, am very happy to see, there's a real, when the English went over and colonized, it was forbidden to speak they were forbidden to speak their own language.
Mhm.
Now it's really having a resurgence, and it's coming back, which I think is wonderful. It's being taught in schools, and I think in terms of cultural identity, and this is obviously speaking as an American person. I'm not an Irish person living in Ireland, but I think it must be a wonderful thing to sort of give you that deeper sense of cultural identity and pride. So
It was actually required when I lived there. Now, we were in a private school, and it was like in 1970. That was required in the school I went to, and I wanted to learn Irish, but they'd already learned, like, it was like 4 or 5 years. So they made me sit in the class, and I didn't understand any of it. I was so bummed. And I've gone a couple times to try and really learn it and take classes, and I just want to become more disciplined, because I've always been interested since that time. And then I think that like people like Mary Jane Lamond singing in Irish brought it back even more to the public, how beautiful, even if you don't understand a word. I personally think it's a beautiful language, and it just gets into your soul. And the other thing I remember is one of our friends who's a scholar, and he's a Choctaw Indian, and he said that if you really want to understand a culture, it's the language. There's no really better way is through language. And I thought, oh, that makes so much sense because of just what you said, what they call the wolf. And I think that is another way, at least, to maybe, even if one doesn't become fluent, just to engage with it as much as you can, whatever level.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it'll enrich you. So that's what I've decided to. Whatever level I'm going to engage in, it doesn't matter if I can speak it or not. It'll enrich my understanding of all of Irish things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it helps you understand the worldview and all of that. So I couldn't agree more.
So is there any sort of last thoughts you have about St. Patrick or Brigid or Emain? How do you pronounce it? Emain
Macha.
Emain Macha.
Yeah.
That you would like to leave us with?
I would actually love to. I've had a copy of this prayer. It's a Saint Brigid's Hearth Keeper prayer, and I think it's a really beautiful. It actually speaks to. There's a rhythm to these sorts of prayers that I find unique to Irish spirituality, and I think if anybody is familiar with that, they'll recognize it. But also just in this time of, we're approaching the spring equinox, and, in honor of the sort of Celtic Christianity, Irish Christianity, and that bridge to the old ways, I would love to read it out.
Perfect.
So again, this is the Saint Brigid Hearthkeeper prayer. Brigid of the mantle, encompass us. Lady of the lambs, protect us. Keeper of the hearth, kindle us. Beneath your mantle, gather us and restore us to memory. Mothers of our mother, foremothers strong, guide our hands in yours. Remind us how to kindle the hearth, to keep it bright, to preserve the flame. Your hands upon ours, our hands within yours, to kindle the light both day and night. The mantle of Brigid about us, the memory of Brigid within us. the protection of Brigid keeping us from harm, from ignorance, from heartlessness, this day and night, from dawn till dark, from dark till dawn.
That was beautiful. I love that part about from heartlessness. Keep us from heartlessness.
Me too. And I feel it's especially appropriate for these times that we find ourselves in. A reminder to be kind and keep that flame of kindness burning. To keep the light of illumination and intellectual sort of understanding, but also using our creative abilities and using that inspiration and that kindness for the good of all.
I agree. Now, before we have still a few minutes, how can people reach you? What's the best way? Is it through Facebook or?
Yes, Facebook is the best way now. I am building a website, and it should be ready within the next, I'm going to say, month or so. And I'll be offering more classes and things through also the mystery school of the goddess.net. That's another way to find some of my work. I do readings through there as well, Celtic oracle readings. So if people are interested in that, Mother House of the Goddess, mystery school of the goddess.net is a good way to find me for that. But you can look me up on Facebook and send me a message and I'll get back to you.
And it's under your first name spelled Karen, correct? The Facebook?
Correct. Yes.
And Frasca, Frasca, for those of you listening. And then just a quick explanation of what is the Mystery School of the Goddess.
So it's a wonderful online school where all different teachers from all different backgrounds offer online courses. There's courses in every flavor of spirituality that you can imagine, mostly goddess focused, divine feminine focused. But there's an amazing variety and some wonderful teachers on there.
That's great. Yeah, I think that it's not, I took a look at it, I think when I first met Renee, and not a lot of people know about it. And there are a lot, I know it's growing too, but there's some courses that are free as well that people have. So it's a great resource. And then, you can contact that individual person if you like them. And for instance, you get readings with them. So it seems like a great idea.
It is. And Kimberly Moore is the woman who runs it. And she's wonderful. Talk about someone who lives to be of service. She's an amazing priestess and just human in general. So I encourage you to visit that site.
Awesome. Well, I think that I'm very happy that you came on again to continue our conversation about St. Patrick. And I will say that both you and our friend Reverend Jim really inspired me to and particularly you this time, I really started thinking about my Irish past. And I have a lot of fond memories that came back. And I think that's sort of a tribute to your energy because of your love, I know, for all things sort of not just Irish, but sort of that whole area, the English and Wales, and it's a little contagious. So I really felt it this time, and I think it's it made me a little nostalgic, to tell you the truth. I said, Michael, we do plan on some point going over there in Scotland and Wales and doing a sort of tour at some point to ourselves when we have a chance. So,
you will love it. It's just the best, and I'm glad that it was infectious. That's a good thing to infect someone with.
It is. I noticed that about the guests. They really do. I find they really can inspire people into their topics. So thank you again for coming on. We really appreciate it, and I hope you have a great St. Patrick's Day.
Thank you so much, and I hope that you do too. And enjoy. Take care. It's been a pleasure.
And thanks everyone for listening, and have a great St. Patrick's Day tomorrow. And I look forward to next time when we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure together.